There was a significant discovery made at Gobekli Tepe which raises serious questions about what is one of the world's oldest, most mysterious, and is arguably the most important ancient archaeological site on Earth. Some of you may recall seeing the numerous headlines that made their way around the internet back in September, which described a human-like statue that was found at the bottom of a stone wall within Gobekli Tepe, which archaeologists have claimed was intentionally placed here specifically for the purpose of being part of a so-called 12,000-year-old ritual, going on to say that this recent discovery is shedding new light on Neolithic rituals involving spirituality, and claiming that this statue was deliberately placed here under this wall as part of a votive offering. And in case you're not familiar, a votive offering is a gift or object dedicated to a deity, either to fulfill a vow or to give thanks, essentially symbolizing devotion and gratitude to their god or divine being. Okay, well, let's just take a moment and look at the various photos of exactly where and how this statue was physically placed. Notice that this carved relic was found laying face down and at the bottom of the ruins of this crude, shoddy wall, which is literally made up of uncut stone rubble. And ask yourself if anything about this gives you the impression that this was placed here as part of some ritual, sacred offering to the gods, and worthy of the same comparative eminence and sophistication that the rest of this enigmatic site consists of. And also consider the relative sophistication of the actual carved statue itself compared to the heap of rubble that makes up this sloppy makeshift wall, which, let's be honest, shares no resemblance whatsoever to the heart of what Gobekli Tepe actually is. A system of complex carved T-shaped pillars, which archaeologists of course claim is the world's oldest temple. Guys, like I always say, look and think for yourself. You do not need to be an archaeologist to formulate a logical opinion of something like this, especially at a site that actual archaeologists and historians admittedly know so little about. I mean, after all, we don't even know who built Gobekli Tepe, why, how, or even precisely when. But like we all learned from watching Sesame Street as kids, one of these things is just not like the other. It seems to me that it is far more likely that this statue was placed here long after this site was first constructed, which, by the way, we already know from various dating that Gobekli Tepe was occupied for at least 1,500 years before it was buried, which I will have something very interesting to say about in a moment, but just consider the fundamental nature of Gobekli Tepe itself, which is a site comprised of hundreds of sophisticated T-shaped pillars encompassing complex 3D imagery carved right out of the stone itself, and organized in a circular-like fashion, likely created with an astronomical orientation, as many researchers have suggested, despite archaeologists' repeated denial. Because again, according to them, everything is always a temple where ancients allegedly spent all their free time worshiping at. Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. And considering that the most recent scientific studies have suggested that Gobekli Tepe may literally be the world's oldest calendar, potentially detailing a prior doomsday cataclysm, screams of a civilization that was far more knowledgeable and advanced than anything that was supposed to exist at that time nearly 12,000 years ago, which, by the way, is supposed to be more than 6,000 years before the alleged invention of the wheel. Think about that. I do not believe for a second that Gobekli Tepe was built by primitive hunters and gatherers with stone hammers and literal animal bones, which is exactly how archaeologists depict them at the renowned San Liorfa Museum located just down the road from Gobekli Tepe. No, I don't buy it for a second, and I think this does a disservice to the brilliant minds that actually built this site in the first place. And that is exactly my impression when I look at the new statue that was discovered under this wall of rubble. And by the way, if there was any doubt that this statue was carved with the intention of being placed lying face down at the bottom of this sloppy wall, as archaeologists oddly claim, then just consider the fact that it was carved with the feet made as a peg, so that way it could be planted upright and staked vertically into the ground, which means that it was obviously not created with the intention of being placed lying horizontally on the ground as archaeologists found it. It seems to me that it is far more likely that this statue, along with all the other ugly stone walls that we see throughout Gobekli Tepe, which again consist of uncut crude rubble, was constructed by those who found this site later and not by the original builders of Gobekli Tepe. That's right, I am literally suggesting that archaeologists have been completely wrong about this site from the get-go, and that none of these stone walls are part of the original creation of Gobekli Tepe's hundreds of T-shaped pillars. And I am going to share something highly controversial and provocative about that later in this video, involving what I believe are the true origins of Gobekli Tepe. So stick around to the end, as it's quite interesting. But first, if you think that what I just said sounds far-fetched, then ask yourself, why would they carve these impressive images on the pillars, which are clearly meant to tell us something, only to conceal and shroud them within these hideous stone walls of dirt and rubble, where so many of the images would be totally hidden from view? Again, look and think for yourself. Does that really make any sense? In fact, here is something that is likely to surprise a vast majority of people watching this video, which is that even Pillar 43, which is undoubtedly the most notable and widely discussed and debated pillar from the entire site, has never even been fully excavated. That's right, what is located at a portion on the bottom left and on the entire long side on the left, on the inside of it, now hidden from view, from dirt and rubble, has never been fully seen or documented, as archaeologists left it just as they found it when they started digging, as you see now. Yet we know that numerous pillars have imagery carved right into the long sides of the stonework, and here we are about to enter 2026, and nobody has any clue what the rest of this highly debated pillar actually depicts, along with the many, many others that are still shrouded in dirt and rubble. And when I tell you that there's been an egregiously unacceptable lack of excavations at Gobekli Tepe, I usually point out that approximately 128 pillars of the 200 they know exist are still completely buried in the earth, and again, many of which have only been partially excavated and haven't been fully seen or documented, as they've been left partially buried, which, if you ask me, is insane considering that they could physically do it in a single day if they actually wanted to. In fact, just look at the vast portions of dirt and rubble that have been left in situ, which means they've been left exactly as archaeologists originally found it during their initial excavations, and notice that so much of this one confined area of Gobekli Tepe is still totally consumed with dirt, stone, and rubble that is yet to be removed. What are archaeologists even doing out here? Seriously, take a look and notice that there is an enormous amount of debris still covering the entire site, and ask yourself how this is all they've managed to dig and excavate over the last 30 years since excavations began in 1995. Just look at it as pictures are worth 1,000 words. And you know what? I'll take it a step further, and archaeologists will hate me for what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway because it is the truth. Excavating Gobekli Tepe is easy. It is a literal rubble removal project, and I'm not joking. So much of this site could easily be excavated if they got a few dozen archaeologists to work as a human chain and physically remove one stone after the other, and they could easily do this all while taking safe care of the archaeology itself, and all while thoroughly documenting every bit of the archaeological fragments they find as they go, with the use of numerous cameras, LiDAR scanning, and including 360-degree filming while simultaneously removing all this debris. They could record every bit of it for their own archaeological documentation purposes and get this dirt and rubble the hell out of there in a remarkably short period of time if they actually wanted to. Because the truth as to what this ancient site actually was is written on the pillars themselves. And excavating all 200 of them is a vital necessity if we intend to discover the reality of whatever this enigmatic site actually was, which goes far beyond a temple if you ask me. And I'll take it a step further and declare that the history textbook should be rewritten, and the land of ancient Mesopotamia should no longer be considered the cradle of civilization, and that label should be ascribed to Turkey and the Taz-Templar civilization that dates back several thousand years older than the Sumerians of ancient Iraq. You see, Gobekli Tepe is just one site of dozens of ultra-ancient sites that have been found in this region, all of which date back well over 10 and 12,000 years ago. Ancient Anatolia, in the modern-day land of Turkey, is the true cradle of civilization, and it should become a primary focus for archaeologists and historians throughout the world and be taught within school curriculum alongside the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans, which they certainly do teach in school. Now, real quick, circling back to the statue found under this wall and my proclamation that archaeologists' misunderstanding of this discovery and the nature of Gobekli Tepe as a whole, I have another provocative statement to make which illustrates just how wrong their conclusions have been. We have all heard that Gobekli Tepe was said to be purposely buried approximately 11,600 years ago. However, in recent years, many archaeologists have stated that they no longer believe that it was intentionally buried by the hand of man, and are now suggesting that it was simply buried by natural erosional processes, including multiple landslides, or rather hillslides, over a period of hundreds of years. They cite evidence that it was buried incrementally and have concluded that it was just naturally buried. But having visited Gobekli Tepe in person, one of my desires while there was to observe the site and attain my honest impression as to whether it was actually feasible for Gobekli Tepe to have been consumed by hillslides, as they're now suggesting. And the answer is no. It could not have been more clear to me that there would not have been enough earth at the top of the hill or a grade steep enough to explain how this site was completely buried. I mean, just observe what it looked like when they first found it prior to excavation. Gobekli Tepe is nearly at the top of the hill itself, and look at the nature of the inclination compared to the core of this site. Where did this alleged hillslide come from, and are we going to pretend that it would have completely covered the 22-acre site in its entirety like it was? It seems to me that what they're actually seeing is that it was purposely buried incrementally and not in one single day. But if there was one detail that is the smoking gun evidence that debunks the theory that Gobekli Tepe was filled naturally from hillslides, it's the ancient ruins located at the very top of the hill itself, which were all totally buried with dirt and rubble. Look closely at exactly where these ruins are located at the site and ask yourself how this could have been feasibly buried as a result of a hillside. It makes no sense. And I'd say that it's obvious with anyone who has eyes to see that it was buried with the placement of stones one after the other to fill it in. And not only that, if Gobekli Tepe had actually been buried as a result of numerous landslides, then it seems to me that the pillars along with all the shoddy walls would have been completely bulldozed and destroyed in the process. Yet they expect us to believe that tens of thousands of tons of earth pummeled over this ancient site without knocking it over. Do you really think these shoddy walls would have held up after being bulldozed in the process? Or is it more likely that the walls were simply not part of the original creation of Gobekli Tepe and were actually part of the intentional burial process itself, and was a method of systematically filling in the site in an organized process that ensured the preservation of the relics, including the pillars? Leave a comment and share your thoughts on this. After all, archaeologists are not geographers or geophysicists. It seems to me that there are way too many holes in the argument that Gobekli Tepe was buried naturally. But now is the part where I want to share something interesting, provocative, and honestly, highly controversial as to what I think Gobekli Tepe was in the first place. I firmly believe that the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe of 11,600 years ago, which included a sudden and rapid rise in global sea levels, and the fact that it happened at the same exact time that Gobekli Tepe was buried, is not a coincidence, especially when considering the latest scientific studies which suggest that it was a literal calendar potentially documenting an ancient disaster. At what point does it go beyond a coincidence? And although I am not a biblical literalist, I do genuinely believe that there is some truth to the story of Noah's Ark, and that there may have been those that understood that a catastrophe was imminent and took great precautions to survive and carry on life afterwards. No, that does not mean that every single animal species on Earth were all placed into one single vessel, nor does it have to mean that the ocean levels exceeded all the mountain ranges on Earth for this story to be based on some level of truth. And I find two specific details about this story extremely interesting. One is what's written in Genesis 8:20, which is that immediately after the flood, when Noah left the ark, he was said to build an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on that altar. I find that incredibly interesting for multiple reasons. One of which is the fact that so many of the T-pillars at Gobekli Tepe depict various animals, including birds on them. And coupled with the wide belief that if Noah's Ark actually existed, it would have landed on Mount Ararat in Turkey. which just so happens to have a unique possibility of containing the ecological skeleton of what may have been Noah's Ark, as it's virtually the same exact length of what was described in the Bible. And by the way, if this was Noah's Ark, it's important to understand that what's remaining is not wood, as the researchers that proposed this have stated that if this was Noah's Ark, what we're seeing today is nothing more than the skeletal shape of the existence prior to the being totally eroded and consumed by the earth, as of course wood would not withstand over 12,000 years. Now, to be totally fair, this is hotly debated, and I am honestly not at all convinced that this was Noah's Ark. However, considering its location being found on Mount Ararat of all places, along with the bizarre fact that it's virtually the same size, I'd say that if nothing else, it is extremely interesting and worthy of further study and conversation, especially when we consider the ultra-ancient nature of all the sites found within Turkey which warrant being referred to as the true cradle of civilization. I mean, if Noah's Ark existed, and if it landed in Turkey, it would make all the sense in the world that the earliest remnants of human civilization would be found within the same geographical region, which is precisely where we find the mysterious ultra-ancient Tas-Templar sites. In fact, it's also in the same region where some 200 underground cities were found, some of which housed 20,000 people plus livestock, and reached depths of 280 feet and was an astonishing 18 levels deep into the earth, as is the case of the massive underground city of Derinkuyu, which, by the way, if you haven't caught my recent video on this, I am telling you it is a must-see, as the details involving this deep underground doomsday bunker are truly mind-blowing, and I had the pleasure of going there earlier this year. Go check out this video after this one. But one last detail to share, which ties back to the statue they found at Gobekli Tepe. Notice that its arms are found facing the front of the body with its hands at the navel, just as we've seen at numerous other sites from around the world, including the mysterious Moai statues on Easter Island, and even as far away as Indonesia. Is this unique similarity evidence of a lost ancient connection, or is it just a coincidence? I honestly do not know the true answer, but something tells me there could be truth to it, and it is worthy of further study and research. Now, with all of this said, leave a comment and share your thoughts on everything I shared in this video. Do you believe that this statue was part of a votive offering and was placed there intentionally, along with the builders of Gobekli Tepe that created all the pillars? Do you think that the walls within Gobekli Tepe are part of the original construction as well? And do you think Gobekli Tepe was purposely buried, or was it done naturally? And lastly, do you think that it's possible that the altar that Noah was said to have built could be Gobekli Tepe? These are all interesting questions and obviously worthy of debate. So leave a comment and share all your thoughts on this. But my name is Jimmy Corsetti. My channel's called Bright Insight. Hit the like button and subscribe. And stay tuned, as I'm going to have another fascinating video out for you in just the next couple weeks. And again, don't forget to go check out that video I made on Derinkuyu. But I'll wrap it up there. Take care, everybody.